deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, reduce the top marginal tax rate for individuals, for corporations, and for the estate tax to 25%, eliminate the difference between ordinary income and capital gains. If you can get the top marginal tax rate down to 25%, you can eliminate the difference between long-term capital gains and ordinary income without having an adverse economic impact. If you can take that as a framework, now and also allow a deduction of corporate dividends for several reasons. One, to eliminate double taxation of dividends. Secondly, to put corporations in a position where they'll either have to, invest the trillions in excess cash that they have for growth and jobs, or distribute to increase the likelihood of getting more growth and jobs, and some temporary relief with regard to offshore earnings for a temporary period of time in exchange for a commitment for an investment in growth and jobs here in the United States. We have to recognize that corporations do not have duties of loyalty to countries. Individuals do, but corporations don't. And we therefore have to make sure that our tax policies and our regulatory policies are much more certain, much more competitive, in order to be able to facilitate investment for the long term. And in doing reforms, these are the 6 tests that have to be met. Do they make economic sense? Namely, are they pro-growth? Are they socially equitable? We need a solvent, sustainable, secure social safety net. And those who have more should bear more burden within limits. Are they culturally acceptable? There's a limit as to how much Americans are going to allow themselves to be taxed and how big that they're going to allow government to get. Does it pass a math test? This is the new 4-letter word in Washington, math. If you're trying to balance the budget, if you're trying to stabilize debt to GDP, do the numbers work based upon your proposed reforms, and are they reasonable, or are you trying to play games? Is it politically feasible? Can you pass the House, which is majority rule? Can you get 60 votes in the Senate? And can you get a presidential signature? If you can't do that, it's not politically feasible. And last but not least, it's got to have bipartisan support. If you pass anything on a straight party line vote, it's only a matter of time before it's going to be repealed or dramatically changed, which is the case for the health care bill. My personal view is it's likely to be ruled to be unconstitutional, at least in part. But even if it's not, the fact of the matter is, when it passed on a straight party line vote, and it has such material implications with regard to our economy and our fiscal posture, it's not sustainable, and yet that uncertainty is not good for business and for anybody. These are Management 101 questions that have to be asked about every major federal government organization, policy, and program. And guess what? They've never been asked and answered. Our republic has been in existence since 1789. It still doesn't have a plan. It still has not done a baseline review to try to make sure that it's future-focused, outcome-oriented, affordable, and sustainable. And that's what these do, and we got to get it done. And last but not least, there are 2 organizations that I would ask you to check out. First is the one that I head, the Come Back America Initiative, that I founded, that focuses on restoring fiscal responsibility and sustainability at the federal, state, local level. It's about nonpartisan solutions that can get bipartisan support to accelerate action and to keep us from going over a fiscal cliff. And the second one is No Labels, which I'm one of the 15 national founders. It is a new political movement for Republicans, Democrats, and independents who believe that our political system is broken, that it's been taken over by the wingnuts and by career politicians, that we have to give voice to the sensible center, that we have to promote progress over partisanship and results over rhetoric, and taking steps to try to make sure that that happens through efforts in the area of fiscal responsibility, election reform, and constructive, principle-based compromise so we can make progress. In summary, we live in a great country, probably the greatest in the history of mankind, but we're not as great as we think we are. And we're not exempt from the laws of prudent finance. We can, we must, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we will make the tough choices sooner rather than later and before we have a crisis. But the business community must be more engaged in this fight. This is the future of our country. This is the future of our families. And if the United States has a debt crisis, and it is not exempt from one, and it could happen within the next 3 years if we don't take tough steps, no one will be able to hide anywhere on earth. We can, we must, I believe we will, but I need your help. Thank you very much.
Mr. Walker, in your opinion, what's the odds of getting the balanced budget amendment passed?
I think the odds of getting it passed are greater depending upon the results of the election, but I think you have to define, how do you define the balanced budget amendment, okay? I mean, there are going to be exceptions. There are going to be exceptions to it, and so my view is that, you know, we need to not just focus on a balanced budget amendment, we need to have something that also brings back the pay-as-you-go rules. We also have to have something that makes sure that we can get debt as a percentage of the economy to a reasonable and sustainable level, because even if you have a balanced budget, that doesn't necessarily solve that, and we need to have automatic enforcement mechanisms so if Congress continues to be stalemated, or Washington continues to be stalemated, that things will happen. Because right now we don't have a fail-safe. If it continues to be dysfunctional and we're continuing to head towards the cliff, then there's not a fail-safe that kicks in. We got to have that too. Yes.
Our government is a representative form of government, and it relies on input from everyone. However, not everyone can afford or take the time to give that input, and it seems to me our lobbying system is a hurdle that has big bearing on this issue.
Well, there's no question. I mean, we don't just need policy reforms and operational reforms. We need political reforms. And I'm going to mention 4, 2 of which don't require constitutional amendments, 2 of which do. 1, redistricting reform. We need to maximize the number of competitive districts in the House of Representatives in order to hold people accountable, to dilute the impact of the wingnuts, and to also keep from entrenching career politicians. Secondly, we need open and integrated primaries. You can be a Republican, you can be a Democrat, you can be an independent, you can be whatever you want. But rather than have a Democratic primary and a Republican primary where you have very low turnout, where the wingnuts dominate, and then you end up getting all too frequently candidates where you say, this is all I got to choose from. We have one primary where you can designate your party. The parties can endorse candidates. They can raise money for candidates. They can provide ground troops. But the top 2 vote getters run off for the general election. That would end up significantly increasing turnout for primaries. It would empower the sensible center. It'd give voice to independents who generally decide general elections, but not the primaries, which are the choices that you're given. And thirdly, we need campaign finance reform and some lobbying reform. I would argue on that. And fourthly, I'm for 12 to 18-year term limits. The founders never intended for our country to be run by career politicians. You need people who have had a real job, who come into government for short to medium period of time to do public service. And the disconnect between the real world is real, and the disconnect between the real world and Washington is part of our problem.
Everything seems to be done in Washington on a 10-year window, when the longest term is 6 years. And so when they say they're going to save or spend over 10 years, no one seems to know whether it ever happens. Is there any way we can get some grip on what's actually being spent and when?
Yeah, we need much more transparency and accountability in this area. Typically, 10 years is an expansion from what it used to be, but it's not adequate because of known demographic trends, rising healthcare costs, and a variety of things. Things tend to get a lot worse after 10 years. Plus, when you have a cliff like that, no matter what the period of time is, there are games that you can play with regard to revenues and expenditures to make it look like that you're really making much more progress. That's why I believe that we ought to learn from others and learn from history. When we learn from others, we'll see that some of the countries that ended up putting their finances in order, every 3 to 5 years they have to do 40-year reports. They have to do reports that are subject to great discussion and debate, and typically are subject to election campaigns about how do things look 40 years out, okay? So you deal with the intergenerational issues. And I think also we need these budget controls, and we need to use present value principles more. What's the present value impact? For example, if we made changes in Social Security and Medicare and we phase them in over time,